Good afternoon and welcome to Hudson Institute. My name is Dan Battier and I'm an adjunct fellow at Hudson. And it is my pleasure today to welcome Hector Schamis to discuss Latin America's foreign policies at a crossroads. Hector Schamis has spoken at Hudson on numerous occasions in the past. He is currently an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. He has written for many periodicals, including El País, La Nación, Clarín, and he currently writes about Latin American affairs and world affairs for Infobae. Hector, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan.
For years, Latin America has not experienced interstate conflict, but over the last year, there has been increasing friction between countries in the region. I'm referring not only to the recent incidents between Venezuela and Chile, and the diplomatic crisis between Mexico and Ecuador, but also to Venezuela's threats to Guyana over the Essequibo region. Hector, what is driving this friction in the region these days?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, we are going through difficult times, domestically in many countries, as well as in our international relations. And we're playing politics with ideology, which is always part of politics, but sometimes it feels that in our region it's sheer ideology and there's nothing else. There's no pragmatic component of our foreign policies, values and principles that are important, especially in our region, by virtue of having gone through human rights issues and vulnerabilities. We're countries, middle-sized countries. We're not military powers for the most part. And all those principles and values have been left along the way. And we play ideology. And, well, the case of Venezuela in Essequibo is a typical case of a dictator in trouble, right? And when a dictator is in trouble, it may well be attractive to make up a war. I actually was born in a country that had exactly that in 1982 with Falklands Malvinas. A dictator in trouble found convenient to fight a war. And that may well happen. So that's one. Then, you mentioned the crisis, the diplomatic crisis between Ecuador and Mexico. It's a time of friction, to put it mildly, I would say.
Ecuador was clearly transgressed international norms with the raid on the Mexican embassy, but Mexico had also been giving refuge to a convicted criminal and former vice president. So we're seeing leaders around the region who seem emboldened and willing to really transgress norms in a way that wasn't the norm in the past.
Yeah, well, there is a precedent, however. There was a minister of Rafael Correa's cabinet who was in the Argentinian embassy and in asylum, and then the next day showed up in Caracas. And the ambassador then just took her by secret outside of Ecuador and showed up in Caracas. Also with charges, also claiming political persecution. But I guess the Ecuadorian government didn't want to go through the same again. That's one thing. The other thing is that, well, if there are controversies about the statue of, this person, Glass, Correa's vice president, by the way, and also Lenin Moreno's vice president for a little bit. There are other mechanisms, but that is the no-no. That's a red line you don't cross. It's, invasion of territory, violation of sovereignty. That we cannot go that way. And of course, there will be a crisis, and now the crisis is multifarious. It's affecting Alianza Pacífico. It's having, very negative effects all over. And it wasn't a good idea, I would say, at least.
The governments of the region have had a conflicted response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Is this a case of a missed opportunity for these governments to play a constructive role?
Again, it's a missed opportunity to keep norms, principles, and values, in the foreign policy package that you choose, design, and implement. There was a violation of sovereignty, there was a violation of territorial integrity, and a war of aggression, unjustified and unprovoked invasion of one country by another country. Those are sensitive issues in the Americas, obviously. And they should have sided with those norms. And they missed the opportunity. And of course, there are explanations for that. Russia has alliances in the region, has two military bases in Venezuela, has troops in Nicaragua, and of course that plays a part, but that's part of the problem that we're facing. We're also facing security threats, and we are becoming, the Americas may be becoming a playing field of large powers as well, unfortunately.
Is this also a symptom of sort of a short-term approach to foreign policy in the region?
You may say that, short-term, short-sighted, and again, a little bit, foreign policy has the peculiarity of being state policy, not government policy. Foreign policy should not have swings from one to another and contradicting itself constantly, as it is the case. And part of ideology so much present in our political processes these days is that it's present in foreign policy. And then there is a pendulum, there is a cycle, left, right, or so they say, right and left. I don't know anymore which is which, certainly. And but then, they do exactly the opposite, and they do it losing perspective of the fundamental, permanent issues at stake, the integrity of the state and the norms of international right, or international law, that you have to side with, especially if you're a small power in the international system. All you have is international law. If you're not going to side with international law, you'll be subject, you'll be vulnerable, you'll be in trouble when it comes to you, problems of a similar nature.
How do you assess the response of leaders in the region to other global events, including Israel's war with Hamas?
Well, same thing. A number of countries ran to condemn Israel for violations of international humanitarian law, as it's been going on, without saying a word about Hamas terrorist attack. And the same issue is at stake. You denounce a terrorist attack, that certainly there are 133 hostages still in captivity out of that attack, a crime against humanity, not a word on that, and yet several statements on the gross violations of international humanitarian law, as it appears to be the case. Both things need to be there for foreign policy to be credible, to build reputation on your standing in the world. And that's certainly missing, unfortunately missing.
Coming back to events within the region, you've described organized crime in Latin America as an occupying force in the region. It's probably the most serious, most pressing issue in the region right now. And given the transnational nature of a lot of the crime groups that we see now, how do you think the region should be responding to this threat?
Certainly in a collective way, in a coordinated way, with the help of the international community at large, with the help of the United States, most definitely. Occupying force, in my hometown, Buenos Aires, My mother used to say, I don't go out in the evening. I mean, I go home at 6 and I stay home. And that's a reality of citizens everywhere. It's in Quito, in Guayaquil. It's becoming so in Bogota now because of Tren de Aragua and whatnot. People don't go out at night. There are prisoners in their homes because the street it's dangerous. The street belongs to the organized crime and transnational organized crime. What we saw on TV of these thugs taking over a TV studio in Ecuador was dramatic. Ecuador made the front page of all newspapers in the world that day for a reason. And that's the big danger. It has taken over portions of the state apparatus, portions of the political system. There is literature in our field on subnational authoritarianism in the Americas. Mm-hmm. The fact that, well, nationally democratic regimes coexist with subnational authoritarian regimes. Mm-hmm. And that has been going on for quite some time. But those subnational authoritarian regimes are criminal subnational authoritarian regimes in a good number of localities, in a good number of districts throughout our region, our continent. And that's the biggest threat that we have against democracy these days, because it erodes the rule of law, it breaks down the rule of law, and there's no democratic politics without the rule of law. There is no rights without the rule of law. And citizens will certainly become disaffected with the system, as the polls are showing increasingly, one after the other.
There's been some suggestion that that in one case, Venezuela has used one of its crime groups as an instrument of state policy. Is that, it's the case of Tren de Aragua. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, but it's the same. Mm-hmm. It's the same. It's like, every car manufacturer of a certain size in the world has different brands. It has a luxury brand, it has a not-so-luxury brand, and so on and so forth. I'm not here to mention anybody, but you know who I'm talking about. 2, even 3 different brands targeting different markets. Tren de Aragua is the Venezuelan regime, is the Maduro regime. It's just that depending on the situation, depending on the context, repression is a responsibility of SEBIN, the intelligence service, or Tren de Aragua. They're trained, they are equipped, they've been formed in prisons. It's, the Venezuelans call it pranes. Pranes is criminal organizations organized, run, and directed from prisons. Mm-hmm. And they are out. I mean, they're out. Yes, of course they can go to Chile and kidnap a military officer, exile there, Lieutenant Ojeda, and produce this sort of situation, mm-hmm. Which is humiliating for Chile as well, a violation of sovereignty of Chile to do something like that in addition. Mm-hmm. So it's critical, it's tragic, it's the number one problem and security threat that we have in the Americas. Mm-hmm.
Staying on Venezuela, the Maduro regime's maneuvers to disqualify Maria Corina Machado and then later her designated replacement, I think have been a real test of the region's commitment to democracy. How do you think leaders in the region have responded to that?
Softly, perhaps too softly. Mm-hmm. The signals from Washington are contradictory in that sense because, well, yeah, you must run acceptable elections, free and fair, but at the same time, sanctions have been reimposed, but yet it's a sort of murky way that mm-hmm. reimposition, because companies already operating can apply for a renewal on a case-by-case basis. The signal mm-hmm. is mixed at best. It's not good if you want to say to the Maduro regime, you better fulfill your obligations. That's not the way, certainly. It's been quite confusing throughout, and particularly from Washington, the liberation of Alex Saab to begin with, and the consequences it had. So Maduro knows how to read the signals, and we seem to be approaching another 2018 when it was fraud. Smartmatic denounced the fraud. They added, Smartmatic said at the time, they added 1 million votes. And we may be well going in that direction again, and then the international community at the time did not recognize, all the democracies in the world did not recognize that election and denounced Maduro for usurping power. And the rest, you know what happened, the Guaido interim government, and et cetera, et cetera. We may well be going in that direction, and it's very unfortunate. I'd be surprised if Edmundo González would be sworn into office, who would be the winner in a clean election. On the other hand, the election is 3 months from now. There is no time to organize a decent election in 3 months with a electoral regime a la Venezuela. I mean, so I'm very pessimistic, to tell you the truth.
You've mentioned the Biden administration's negotiations on elections in Venezuela. Can you talk more broadly about how you think the Biden administration has performed in its engagement with the region and its policies toward Latin America?
Well, lights and shadows, luces y sombras in Spanish. Like every foreign policy, I would say, the issue is that we are in an election year here in the U.S., in a few months as well. And naturally, the U.S. political process goes inward in an electoral year. And this year a lot more, I have to say, because the stakes are high. The level of rhetoric is very intense, very early, because we had the two candidates early this year already, which is not usual. Usually they take some time in the primaries, but not this year. The two candidates are there. We know them. They lash at each other nonstop. The White House Correspondents' Dinner was a campaign act the other day, rightly so, perhaps. My friends, the Democrats would say, but that gives you an idea of how polarized the word of our time. That doesn't mean much, but anyway, and but how intense the conflict is, and how harsh this campaign will be. So there is less energy, less focus on the rest of the world, Venezuela, Latin America, perhaps some critical areas of the world will receive the attention, say Ukraine, say Asia, the Middle East, obviously. But Latin America doesn't represent a tangible risk threat for the U.S., immediate risk. It is, but the others are more so. So the election dominates, U.S. foreign policy as well. By the way, we debate immigration in our election here. Immigration is a foreign policy normally, has become part of the electoral dispute.
Yeah. So for many in the United States who observe Latin America, the influence of China has become perhaps one of the greatest threats. You have expressed more concern about other actors in the region. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think the Americans Act is a great idea. I've had a chance to talk to the lawmakers that put it together. I wrote a piece on that. It's a great idea since Bush 41 FTAA, Free Trade Area of the Americas, integration with the Americas. By the way, even when the FTAA failed, because it was rejected by ALBA, actually, in 2005, the U.S. signed free trade agreements with a number of individual countries in the Americas, Chile, Peru, Colombia, et cetera, right? Panama, Central America as a whole, in Mexico, of course, well, Mexico already existed. In any case, I started to rethink that during the pandemic. I said, well, the economy in such a contraction in Latin America, and even when the pandemic was over and the rest of the world was recovering, Latin America was very slow to recover in terms of employment, in terms of economic activity, and so on and so forth. Would it be better, the region would be better or worse if we had a free trade area of the Americas? And I have no doubt in my mind we would be a lot better. We would have recovered faster, we would have had foreign investment, foreign direct investment, much more dynamic, which is, fundamental for job creation, trade, etc. Now, it's a good idea. The U.S. should should have done it long ago, should have had a free trade area, an integration agreement with the rest of the Americas for a long time. It's welcome. Now, China is the main trading partner. There is no Latin American country in a position to give up trade with China. It's the main trading partner of Latin America, of most countries, except Mexico, I think. Mexico is still the U.S., of course, it's the U.S. It has a free trade agreement. I think if there are concerns with China because it's a foreign power, a non-democratic foreign power with influence, with presence, I think there are foreign powers that are a lot more dangerous and represent more immediate risks for the Americas than China right now, Russia and Iran, to be specific. Iran has had presence for quite some time via Hezbollah in the region with attacks in Argentina and in Panama. People talk about, the bombing of the AMIA Center in Buenos Aires, but there's been the next day an attack on a Panamanian airplane, and it has had presence there. Iran has signed a defense cooperation agreement with Bolivia. Argentina's foreign ministry complained, and not this government, not the Milei government, the previous government wrote a note of complaint about that, precisely because of the risk involved for Argentina, given what history has shown. And Russia has, as I said, 2 military bases in Venezuela and military equipment in Nicaragua, and of course, historic influence in Cuba. So China is less of a security threat as it is a commercial threat for U.S. interests, granted. Mm-hmm. But then I would approach that on trade terms, purely. Mm-hmm. China, as far as I know, has not tinkered with institutions in the Americas, only has been part of a trade and investment. I will keep it that way, but.
Okay. So for those who are not aware, the Americas Act that Hector mentioned is a bipartisan piece of legislation that I think provides a kind of a robust, comprehensive new chart toward how the U.S. might approach the region. Among other things, it in an era when there are no new free trade agreements on the horizon, it provides an opportunity for some countries to sort of enter USMCA through sort of a back door.
Well, yeah, but it's a long overdue idea. Mm-hmm. It's a long overdue policy. Bush 41 was a visionary at the time, mm-hmm. and in terms of his foreign policy was visionary all around. I mean, mm-hmm. German unification, among other things, but also trade policy and investment policy for the Americas. Mm-hmm. The Americas enterprise that worked out a deal for debt forgiveness and mm-hmm. credit lines for, at the time, highly indebted Latin American countries. Mm-hmm. That was interrupted, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We are, I believe, nearly 6 months into the presidency of Javier Milei in Argentina. He has shaken things up in Argentina and in the region. What is the significance of Javier Milei in your assessment?
Well, he's difficult to read. On the one hand, when he describes the Argentine economy and what needs to be done is like reading that field of literature called neoclassical political economy. Argentina is a textbook case, empirical textbook case of Anne Kruger's The Political Economy of the Rent-Seeking Society. Argentina's economy is a myriad of rent seekers. It's a place where prices don't clear in terms of reflecting supply and demand, because everybody who is in a market, in an economic activity, enjoys some sort of subsidy, some kind of protection, extracts some kind of rent at the expense of whoever doesn't enjoy those protections and wants to be productive and cannot. It has become difficult to export, difficult to import, difficult to invest. It's impossible in Argentina, it's impossible to register a car, to buy a car and register it because of regulations and because of monopolies, private monopolies that administer that process. And no economy can function like that. Argentina's long decline has to do with that, obviously. And he wants to change that. Welcome. I support that, definitely. Capitalism has to work, has to be capitalism, not just for my friends, but for my non-friends. And Argentina has been successful capitalism for the friends of power. Nobody makes money far away from power for a long time. The question is the politics. Sometimes it's contradictory, sometimes I like what he said. And then the next day, something happens. Senators get a 100% increase in their salaries. While the economy is in a contraction, negative 2.5% for 2024, and society supports that because the country needs our sacrifice. I mean, friends of mine say that, no, we support him, and we have to sacrifice ourselves for this to work. Okay, but then if lawmakers get a 100% increase, all of them, opposition, government, people, all parties, total Senate, then it doesn't look good, to say the least. And then you cannot go to society to ask them for more sacrifice on that notice. And sometimes the politics is, leaves me, confused. He, on the other hand, President Milei communicates something important. He communicates to me, he communicates, I'm here to do what I think is right. If I cannot do it, I don't have to be here to do something else. And that's quite original for a politician, at least in Argentina, but not only in Argentina, as you know, in several places as well.
On the foreign policy front, he is unabashedly pro-American. He supports Israel. He is taking a different stance on Ukraine than his predecessor.
Yeah.
Could this mark a shift in the foreign policy approach of the region? Perhaps
it would, and I agree with those stance. And U.S., the Middle East. I mean, again, it comes down to norms and principles. You side with democracies, wherever they are. That, can get you. You can be wrong occasionally, but in the long run, that's going to make you right, most likely. He's active with Ukraine. He's collaborating. His government is collaborating with Zelensky's idea of a Ukraine-Latin American summit. I find that to be important, and I find that positive, of course. And let's see how it goes. A shift for everybody, a sort of a collective shift, well, that remains to be seen, I would say.
Beyond foreign policy, I'd like to get your perspective on the region as a whole. It feels like much of the region is a bit adrift. Very low growth, political polarization,
Yeah.
many governments facing significant domestic crises with sort of not a lot of latitude for action. Diminished appetite for cooperation between countries in the region on very pressing issues. How do you see the region broadly moving forward?
It's tough. I mean, and also I would add, Daniel, the resiliency of our old, traits, poverty, inequality, etc., discrimination. Altogether is a very explosive mix that the pandemic magnified in a big way. And at the same time, it has put a lot of strain on our institutions. Very little respect for the operation of our institutions on the part of leaders and opposition as well, on the part of society. A disdain for constitutional mechanisms. We see it all around. I mean, well, we have organized crime. We have the Bukele solution, typical example, with the concentration of power in his hands, with a total amount of public power in his hands. And he's successful so far fighting organized crime. Good for that. Now, is that political reconfiguration a necessary condition to fight organized crime successfully? The problem is that I don't think so, because it's only a question of time until, and I'm not picking on El Salvador, I'm just using it as a good example of what's a fundamental issue and a proposed solution, right? Heavy hand, mano dura is attractive, but it must be done with the law, with the Constitution. It's just a question of time that the citizenry stop fearing organized crime. In those terms, we'll start fearing fearing another criminal organization, the state, that operates without law, without due process, etc., etc. And if so, then it's one evil for another, and it's not a good solution either.
Yeah, yeah. So in that litany of evils, I didn't even mention the rise of populism and democratic regression in the region. It seems like the only momentum in the region is behind the authoritarians in the region.
Well, I'm always agnostic on the very word populism. That's one thing. Academically, I hardly ever use it. I use it only as a historical phenomenon of post-1930s, post-World War II Latin America. What there is a erosion of constitutional mechanisms and respect for those institutional norms. And it happens so pervasively. I just, look, I've known populist movements and parties that gave up power, didn't perpetuate themselves in power. Peronism gave up power. The PRI gave up power. They reformed the electoral system, and in 2000, the PRI lost an election, and the incumbent president transferred power. Cedillo, PRI president, transferred power to Vicente Fox, PAN president, PAN candidate and president. I think that's a critical issue, that the word populism itself clouds our understanding sometimes with that. The issue is there are so many presidents in office tinkering with the rules to stay longer than the time period they were elected for. And that's fraud. That's fraud for the voters, and that's a violation of the letter and the spirit of the Constitution. Now, constitutions can change, but not for my benefit while I'm in power. When that happens, it's a violation of trust in the system, and society takes notice, always does.
Yeah. Well, Hector, I want to thank you for coming to Hudson today, and thank you for ending on a positive note. And I want to thank our audience for coming today. I think there's been an important conversation. You've provided some insights on some topics that I've been grappling with, and which I have not been able to see a clear way forward on. So thank you for your insights.
Well, thank you. Good answers are a product of good questions. So they don't happen by themselves. So thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you.